This is part 1 in the Delta 7-inch motor-driven grinder rebuild. If you haven't seen any of my other videos, go to my channel page and check some of them out. In this video, we're going to be going over a little bit about the history of this grinder and how it came into my possession and why we're rebuilding it. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Okay, so this is a Delta 7-inch grinder that was gifted to me by a Garage Journal member who's a friend of mine. It was pulled out of a factory in a different state, not in Georgia. It's obviously been repainted this god-awful orange and yellow, but there's some unique things about this grinder, and this is not the first grinder that I've rebuilt. Delta grinder that I've rebuilt, but this is probably the earliest one that I've ever rebuilt. And we're going to go over some specifics on how we date the grinders and whatnot, and some resources for anybody that's looking to rebuild any Delta tools really, but grinders. So the first one that I actually rebuilt was this pedestal mounted grinder. This is a Delta Rockwell, and this one was built around 1955. And we know that because of a couple of things. One, it's Delta Rockwell, and this motor tag here or grinder tag here is different than on my current grinder that we're going to be rebuilding. You can see here this tag is a lot more Art Deco-ish. So it was earlier in the Delta brand. It's also, it just states Delta and made in the United States, Delta Manufacturing Company. And so there was a specific time frame that was just Delta Manufacturing. And we'll show you how we figure all this out. So if we go back to the web, so on the grinder that I rebuilt, this was the motor tag or the serial number tag that's on the back of the motor. And you can see again, it's Delta Rockwell, but the serial number itself is 3 digits dash and then 4 digits. And that's important because we can date these machines based on serial numbers to an extent. And just to wrap up with this one, let's see if I've got some pictures of it when I completed it. There we go. So this is it completed. And that's the twin lights, the eye shields that are unique to most of your Delta grinders. So that was the pedestal one that I rebuilt back in 2021, I believe. So any tools that you have that are vintage, we've got this website called vintagemachinery.org, and navigating the website can be a little bit weird at first, but it's really simple. So we're going to go to Manufacturer's Index, and here you would look for whoever made the tool or what brand it was sold under. So for instance, you can find Sears Craftsman in here and so on, but we're going to scroll down till we get to Delta. And here you can see Delta Specialty, Delta Manufacturing Company, Delta Rockwell, and then Rockwell International. And this takes you to this page that tells you a brief history of the company. That it started in 1919, and it was in 23, it was Delta Specialty Company. And In 45, Delta was sold to Rockwell. So everything that was Delta Specialty or Delta Manufacturing was before that date. And you can find a lot of information on here. But one of the cool things about this website is, let's say we were looking for a parts diagram for a specific tool. We can go to Publication Reprints, and here we have a ton of PDFs to look at. But if we wanted to narrow this down by machine type, and let's say we're looking for grinders, and then here we could go to, here's a 7-inch standard grinder. This is a 1958 publication, but it's probably pretty close to what we're looking for. And then we can click on the PDF. And here you got your parts diagram, wiring diagrams, how to assemble the twin lights, how to assemble the pedestal, and so on, as well as part numbers. So let's go back. So what we're most interested in right now is trying to date the serial number that's on the grinder we're working on. So if we go look, here's the serial number plate that's on the back of this grinder. And you can see that it used to be red in this recessed area. And the serial number is 4-5467. And once I took this plate off, I tested it with a magnet, and it's aluminum. So it's not anything that's ferrous. Well, right here, Delta Rockwell serial numbers. And this is going to take us to the wiki that's going to give us some more information. So here we are, and we've got some of the examples of serial number plates. And it says that Style 1 was aluminum, Style 2 was brass, steel, or oil board, and then Style 2B was steel. Style 2C was just oil board. And it gives you some rough dates that these were used. So this one was used sometime around 39 to 40, and then 42, and then again 44 to 47. And it gives you some measurements of that plate as well. This is kind of important. If you're missing a serial number plate, you could measure the distance between the rivet holes on the tool you're working on, and that might help you narrow down what kind of serial number plate was originally on that device. But for our purposes, we have Delta began assigning serial numbers in 1941, which is a little weird because we're saying that they started using this one sometime around 39. The problem that we run into is a lot of the information that's out there about vintage tools in general is estimations based on what people find in catalogs, receipts, original owners of tools, and sometimes contact with the manufacturers. But for Delta, we no longer have those contacts or records, so a lot of it is a crapshoot and just basic estimation. But in this example, you can see that this is also a 4- and then 3-digit number, 4-621. So for us, we need to know, when did the 4- come into play. And if we scroll down here, we're looking at serial numbers that began in 41, and all of those started with 1300 or 13 dash, and then 15 dash, and so on. And those numbers just went up. They never went down again. So most likely this plate and my plate were prior to 41, most likely before 39 even. And the reason I say that is because I found some 1935 publications out there that reflect a lot of the aesthetics that I see on the grinder that I currently have. So, and I'm going to show some of that in a little bit, but in general, we can assume that the grinder I'm working on today is probably somewhere between 1935 and or even 1934 and 1939, somewhere in there. So if we go back to our pictures, so a lot of times when you see these grinders for sale, they may or may not have the twin lights on them, and you can usually find the twin lights for sale separately, but they probably don't come with that quench cup. And that was the case on the first grinder that I rebuilt, the pedestal one. It didn't have a quench cup. So I had to source a quench cup. And with this grinder, I had to source a couple of parts as well. If you look at this tool rest, you'll see that you don't see the prongs that come off the back of the tool rest like you do over here, where it kind of wraps around the stone. And that's because somebody filled in the gap between those prongs. They welded in a piece of steel here and filled it in. And I cut that out of there and cleaned that up a little bit when I got into disassembly. But one of the things that I found was there are two rails on the sides of the covers that hold the armatures for these tool rests. And the bottom rail on this side was broken. So I had to order a used inner side cover for this wheel on this side. And I got that off eBay for like $20. But on my other grinder, I had to get new glass for the eye shields, and I had to get some new clips that hold that glass in place, as well as sourcing the quench cup. And for that, eBay is our friend. So these are items that are sold by one eBay seller in particular. And he sells stuff for just about all kinds of Delta tools. Bandsaws, unisaws, grinders, replacement lenses for the eye shields, spark arresters, you name it, he sells it. In fact, I got this panel that goes on my pedestal from him. But for the grinder that we're working on today, this is the grinder nameplate or name panel that has all of your basic information about the motor and grinder itself. The problem I have is this doesn't look like the original. This is a decent reproduction, but it's nowhere close to the original. If you look at the text here, this is just standard text. And on the original, the text has got kind of a 3D effect to it. Also, the area under the tab here and here is red. And all of the lines are a lot more defined. Even the bottom of this radius is more rounded and less pointed than in the example that this guy is selling. Yeah, it's kind of pointed there. These aren't as defined. So we have a guy on Garage Journal Forum that reproduces tags and panels and whatnot. His name is Matt Blast, or that's his user ID. And I had him reproduce a tag for me. And we'll take a look at that and some of the differences between this one, the original, and what he did for me in a later video when we get to assembly. But if you're looking for something and you need it for, a Delta item that you're rebuilding, this seller is PD2 Bob is his name. Sorry if you can hear my dog barking in the background. So PD2 Bob, and there you go. You can buy all kinds of stuff from him. So talking specifically about this grinder, there are some unique things about it. You'll notice it has a little brass tag right here. And this was put on by the factory that bought this grinder from Delta. They probably marked all of their machinery inside the factory. So the factory this came out of put this on the grinder. And it's kind of a unique little neat, nifty, cool thing about this grinder specifically. And you'll see this on various vintage pieces of equipment. Also, if we look here, the model number for this grinder is W2268B. And I looked all over and couldn't find hardly anything about that model number. It doesn't jive with any of the model numbers that are in catalogs, going all the way back to like 1933 and then going all the way forward. I couldn't find anything out there. I did find one other person that has the same model grinder, but they didn't have any additional information either. So we know it's a triple duty grinder. We can get the voltage and the horsepower and all that stuff from this tag, but that model number just doesn't jive with anything out there. And this is kind of what I've found to be a problem with a lot of Delta stuff. My other grinder, for instance, I couldn't find that model number in any catalogs either. And it was like a 22 something, something, something. I also couldn't find parts diagrams or owner's manuals that were specific to these model numbers. But you can find parts diagrams and manuals to what a lot of people refer to as the old style or early model grinders and that kind of thing. So finding the literature for this grinder isn't going to be super difficult, but in general, the model number doesn't help a whole lot when you're dealing with Delta equipment, from my experience. So that is the grinder, and that's how I got it. And I'm rebuilding this for my brother. And when it was given to me, like I said, I don't know. I was told that it was working, but it didn't have any of the power cables or anything left on it. So I don't know. I may end up spending all this time rebuilding this thing and then it not run. But we'll see, whether I get embarrassed or whether, and have a really big paperweight, or whether or not we get a running grinder. In any case, these Delta grinders are awesome grinders in general. I think they're probably the highest quality grinders you can get out there at the user level without going to like 10-inch wheels and that kind of thing. And if you're familiar with Baldor, there was a lot of back and forth between Baldor and Delta in the grinder world, and I think they're outstanding products in general. So this is the 1935 brochure that I mentioned earlier, and the grinder that's pictured in the first page is definitely an exact match for the grinder I've got. A lot of the aesthetics that I can see here, the twin lights don't actually have the labeling on them of twin light. That piece that was broken off on the left side side cover is designed exactly like it is here in this image. And even the tag, the motor tag itself, is the same Art Deco style. And this is consistent with a lot of the catalog images that I saw in the mid-30s going all the way up to the 39, 40 time frame, which is just one more reason why I believe that the model I'm dealing with is probably going to be a 1934 or 35 to 38 model. But in the end, it's a Delta 7-inch grinder, and we're going to rebuild it in coming videos. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments, and I hope you'll enjoy this series. So, like always, I appreciate the support, and I will see you next time.